This week on Jerusalem Dateline, major unrest in Iran as many are asking if this could be the beginning of the end for the regime. We'll discuss that possibility with our CBN News team. Plus, Scott Ross looks at the first century town of Magdala and the synagogue where many believe Jesus preached. And passages. Christian students come to Israel for a life-changing experience. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. While Washington debates the killing of Qasem Soleimani, Iranians are risking their lives as they cry out for freedom. Throughout Iran, tens of thousands of Iranians have taken to the streets to protest against the Iranian regime. Some believe the public demonstrations represent an historic threat to the 40-year Islamic Republic of Iran. Here's a look at some of the demonstrations and what these Iranians are saying. From Tehran to Isfahan to Hamadan, Iranians defied their government and called for its end. In Tehran, crowds shouted for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, to step down. This crowd chanted, "Dictator, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, you are our ISIS." The defiance comes just days after Iran buried its number 2 leader, Qasem Soleimani. Now his posters are being torn down in the streets and taken down from walls. At Amir Kabir University in Tehran, hundreds of students refused to step on the American and Israeli flags and shouted at those who did. President Trump tweeted directly to the leaders of Iran in both Farsi and English. To the leaders of Iran, do not kill your protesters. Thousands have already been killed or imprisoned by you, and the world is watching. More importantly, the USA is watching. Middle East expert Wally Ferris tweeted that Trump's message was the equivalent of President Ronald Reagan telling Gorbachev to tear down this wall. But the protesters risked their lives. These videos show some people have been shot during these protests. A few months ago, Iranian authorities killed 1,500 Iranians who protested.
The Iranian populace is very much dissatisfied with the Iranian regime, saying, how come you are ignoring the 1,500 that died, but yet you're mourning this individual, a person who probably had direct involvement in killing those 1,500.
The protests come after Iran finally admitted it accidentally shot down a Ukrainian airliner with 176 people on board. For days, Iranian officials denied any blame for the tragedy. In Washington, Democrats are scrambling to rein in President Trump with a war powers resolution and question the administration's intelligence that led to Soleimani's killing. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien defended the president's decision.
And we had exquisite intelligence, and the intelligence showed that they were looking at U.S. facilities throughout the region.
In the wake of the killing of Soleimani, many people are looking at the importance of his legacy. The many Shia militia groups poised for military action throughout the Middle East. One researcher has spent years studying these groups and has an important message to the West and the U.S. Philip Smythe created the Shia Militia Mapping Project, an exhaustive research effort identifying Iranian-backed Shia militias throughout the Middle East. He says they're an extension of Iranian power.
They are the spear point for the Iranians. You know, we talk about their nuclear weapon and the nuclear threat that's coming out of Iran, but this is the real nuclear weapon on the ground. This is what affects change in the region. This is what's kept dictators in power that the Iranians have wanted. For instance, Bashar al-Assad. It's the Shia militias that supported him. How do they control Lebanon? Lebanese Hezbollah.
Smythe says Qasem Soleimani masterminded these states within states and wove them throughout the region from Iran to Lebanon.
But he was a guy on the ground who knew how to build relationships, and not just that. What made him very important was how he was able to delegate to other commanders. He knew who the right people were, who was going to be ideologically loyal, who could be financially loyal.
These militia groups number as many as 200,000 and pose a threat to America's #1 ally in the Middle East, Israel.
A massive one. This is the tip of the spear for the Iranians in terms of fighting the Israelis.
He says Americans should know about these groups and care.
Well, they should care because these groups have been consistently threatening the United States and its interests in the region. And ideologically, they hold that the United States needs to not only be out of the region, but religiously speaking, they view the United States as what they call Shaitan al-Akbar, or the greatest Satan. And that's a true belief that many of the hardcore ideologues hold. That means they want to take American lives when they view it as strategically advantageous.
Based on Smythe's research, it's clear America, Israel, and the West will be dealing with these Shia groups throughout the Middle East for the foreseeable future. Up next, CBN News senior correspondents discuss the current state of Iran and its future. With crippling sanctions and Iranians protesting in the streets, could this be the moment the Iranian regime will fall? Here's one perspective from Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah of Iran.
I think people smell the opportunity for the first time in 40 years this time. Very different than 2009, even very different from 1997. The people have had it. Today's generation of young Iranians cannot take it anymore. They want to have an opportunity for a better future. They want to be on the path of modernity and freedom. The only thing that stands between them and the free world is this regime.
To discuss more about Iran, I talked with CBN senior international correspondents Gary Lane and George Thomas from our CBN News headquarters. George and Gary, thanks so much for joining us on our Jerusalem Dateline. Gary, first to you. Are we seeing an unprecedented protest there in Iran? And could this be the beginning of the end of the Islamic regime?
Well, Chris, I think that's wishful thinking on the part of many people, but in reality, we never thought the Berlin Wall would come down, and I was in Berlin when that happened. At the time, we didn't realize what was happening. So could this be that moment? It may be up to God, but also a lot of other factors. Iran is a mess right now economically. If you look at unemployment, young people between the ages of 15 and 24, it's approaching 30% unemployment for that age group. Inflation is over 12%. And then also you have the average Iranians only making about $10,000 for their household income, and they're fed up with this regime. And one of the reasons is because of corruption. But people are fed up. They're saying, look, this is a corrupt regime. There's a lot of corruption. And the shooting down of that aircraft liner that had 82 Iranians on board, that was the last straw. And we've seen these people out in the streets. As you say, Chris, unprecedented. Will it lead to a collapse of the regime? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. George, to you, Gary referred to President Reagan when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The Berlin Wall did fall. What are you hearing and seeing from inside Iran right now?
There is unprecedented level of depression. This has been an issue that's been going on for quite some time. Some would say for 40 years, because they realized what life was like before the ruling Ayatollahs came into power in 1979. But so much has changed in the last 40 years, and it's become more pronounced, I would say, in the last 5-6 years, especially in the last 3 years, as the Trump administration continues to put the screws, the economic, political screws on the country. But there is this widespread level of depression. They feel so hopeless about the future. People are not, they don't have money to spend. They don't have enough medicine to go to the hospital to care for their loved ones who are ill. They don't have basic commodities, basic supplies, so like oil, flour, all other bread, the sort of basic things that people take for granted. So there's this unprecedented level of uncertainty.
Yeah, Gary, you referred to the Berlin Wall. Many people didn't think that was going to come down. Now, if the Islamic regime did fall, are there any viable alternatives to the regime right now?
Well, one person that people in the West are pushing is Reza Pahlavi. And Reza Pahlavi, the 59-year-old son of the late Shah, who was overthrown, of course, late Shah overthrown in the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So many people are looking to him, but especially the older Iranians who remember, as George said, what life was like under the Shah. It was much better.
Reza does say is that, he made a very clear clarion call this week at the Hassan Institute, he said it was time to stop negotiating with the ruling clerics in Tehran, that it was time that the United States support the people. So it's all about supporting the people and allowing the people to rise up from within. And so that was a very clear call by Reza Pahlavi.
And the thing about that, Chris, is he's talking about regime change, and that's one thing that President Trump has never said that the U.S. intended to do. He wanted to see behavior change from the Iranian government, not regime change. So maybe behind the scenes, they're rethinking that policy.
Well, George and Gary, you know, there's an unprecedented revival going on inside Iran right now. You've reported on that, George. A question to both of you in our last minute here. How important is prayer right now for the people of Iran?
Gary,
first to you.
Yep, go ahead, Gary.
It's extremely important because we see through prayer that there is change. As I said earlier, we never thought the Berlin Wall would come down, but Christians were involved in that. There were people in Poland that were part of Solidarity, the Solidarity movement, in the church. The Catholic Church was very much involved. People praying, and we saw that wall come down. There's power in prayer. Yes, it can make a difference.
Go ahead, George.
I was just in Ukraine this past week, a satellite province of the former Soviet Union, and the believers I spoke to there said they never expected it. They never thought it would ever happen. But behind the scenes, they were praying. They were praying for 80 years. It took a long time. But they believed prayer was the catalyst that brought down the Berlin Wall. And you can believe it, and you've reported on it inside Iran, along the walls of this beautiful nation. Underground believers are praying for the Holy Spirit to come and invade their nation. Amen. And that there would be a transformative change in that country.
Up next, take a look with Scott Ross at one of the most important archaeological finds in recent history, the first century synagogue where many believe Jesus preached. What started as a vision to build a guest house for pilgrims coming to the Galilee took an entirely different direction. After breaking ground, the project turned into an extensive archaeological site, providing a colorful picture of life at the time of Jesus. CBN's Scott Ross takes us to Magdala, the city many believe was the home of Mary Magdalene.
Located on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, Magdala sits at a crossroad of Jewish and Christian history.
Magdala is very significant already just in general culture. One of the most known figures of Christian discipleship is Mary of Magdala. What's the importance of Magdala for the Jewish people? It's a first century town and a very significant excavation in the first century for the Jewish culture.
In 2005, Father Juan Solana initiated the Magdala Project to highlight the ministry of Jesus and an opportunity to honor women of faith. They broke ground in 2009, and what happened next, Father Eamon Kelly describes as providence.
We bought this piece of land, and then to find it in Magdala, the land, and not just on any hill around the Sea of Galilee. And then you start digging with two prayers. Lord, spare us from archaeology, because it's an expensive hobby. And then a big delay for all the project. The second prayer was, if you do give us archaeology, give us something good. And so we find this incredible discovery of a first century synagogue.
Seated in the synagogue, Father Kelly told me about some of the features that make it so amazing.
So we're in a very big room. And we see it's organized with 2 rows of seating here in the central part, and we have another row of seating inside the outer walls. This is a space that's not a family home. It's a very ornate community room that has this mosaic and the frescoes, and the mosaic has 2 parts, the rosette mosaic with the 3 colors, but now the specialists are telling us there are 26 colors in the mosaic, and then we have the unending pattern which shocks some people, but they say this was also in the temple in Jerusalem. And then we have the Magdala stone right bang here. This is the place where we found it. Now this and the one out there are copies. It's considered and treasured by many archaeologists on the level of the Dead Sea Scrolls in terms of archaeological importance.
Archaeologist Moti Aviam proposed the theory of the Magdala stone, resembling the second temple of Jesus' day.
And I suggested that what we have here is some kind of a model, symbolic of the temple in Jerusalem. We have the menorah, we have the altar, the golden altar, we have the showbread table, and we have a scene into the Holy of Holies.
Because of the commandment against graven images, Aviam says the choice was to portray God symbolically in a divine chariot.
as it is in the book of Zechariah and many other books from the Second Temple period, which gives us a description of the chariot on which God is riding.
So what is the significance then of Magdala, going back in biblical history?
Magdala today gives the largest view, archaeologically, of the time of Jesus.
While there's no physical evidence that Jesus visited Magdala, Father Kelly says the signs are there.
Scott, every day, every group asked me this question: was Jesus here? Was he in this synagogue? Was he in Magdala? And I say, we don't know because we lost all the videos. Jesus was surely present in Galilee, and this is on the path from Nazareth to Capernaum. There's a port here, and he's always crossing the lake. This is a Mecca for the Galilean Sea and fishermen.
At Magdala, the Duke Al-Azam Center is a place for people of different faiths to worship. Its Latin name is taken from Luke, where Jesus tells Peter to launch into the deep. The atrium is designed to honor the Jewish women who followed Jesus in the New Testament. 4 smaller chapels include mosaics illustrating biblical events. And in the boat chapel, a unique boat-shaped altar overlooks the Sea of Galilee.
When the gospel is proclaimed up there at the microphone, it looks like Jesus is preaching again to us from the boat. Imagine you're having liturgy here, prayer, and the boats are going by. It allows people to get into the moment of the gospel happenings.
And downstairs is the Encounter Chapel, where Father Kelly says he believes God is healing divisions between Christians and the Jewish community.
This is part of the road of the first century port. So you know the names of any first century fishermen? So who walked on this street?
Yes.
Now if Jesus came to Magdala, I say he was more often on this street than he was in the synagogue, in our synagogue.
Magdala is staffed in part by international volunteers.
Sometimes you realize you know very little of your faith, so this helps you to go deeper inside and really to live all the things that you can find out in Israel.
I never been in Holy Land before, so it was taking a huge risk. It was very surprising to see what we think about Israel, the Holy Land, and coming here and seeing the reality.
And that guest house for pilgrims? It opened just recently. What's the vision for the future now?
We had to make quite a few adjustments because of the archaeological discoveries, which enriched the site immensely, enriched it with meaning. And then by finding a synagogue, a huge increase of the Jewish-Christian dialogue, and also the Christian-to-Christian encounter, because here we have a place where we were not divided. So where Providence is going to continue taking this in the future, I think we'll all be surprised, as we are every day.
Scott Ross for CBN at Magdala in the Galilee, Israel.
Coming up, see what happens when some Christian students come to Israel for the very first time. Hundreds of American Christian University students embarked on a recent journey to Israel for a unique learning experience. It's part of a program to increase their faith while also introducing them to a modern and vibrant Israel. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
It's called Passages.
As a Christian, your why is rooted in your faith. And your faith is rooted in Israel.
This big event in Jerusalem with Israeli musicians celebrated the 4th anniversary of this unique educational program for American Christian students.
In 2016, Passages was born to give you, the religious, political, social leaders of tomorrow, an opportunity to come to Israel, to ignite your faith, to connect with the values that the United States shares with Israel, and to strengthen your leadership journey.
Former Israeli Knesset member Michael Oren talked about their connection to the land.
Your faith gives you a part of this land, the land of Israel. It gives you a part of this sacred city.
Current U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman told CBN News the trip is invaluable at this time in history.
So to bring these kids here for 10 days and to show them, especially Jerusalem, but all the rest of the parts of the country, it's very, very powerful and very important.
Passages was started by Christian leader Robert Nicholson and Orthodox Jewish Israeli Rivka Kidron.
As I began to become more and more attached to Christianity, I began to see that many people my age and younger were actually going the opposite direction. And I knew that this encounter with the land of Israel could be a remedy for it.
Participants travel the land for 9 days, visiting historic biblical sites and seeing the modern state.
With Passages, they offer something unique by diving deep into the geopolitics of the land, trying to provide a diversity of narratives so that students come out of the trip realizing that the media isn't all that there is to the story.
CBN News spent a morning with students from the University of Alabama visiting Jerusalem's City of David.
As Christians, it's important for us to understand what's going on in the world, and so we're getting to hear lots of different perspectives on that and just become educated from a first-hand perspective.
Student leaders Carter Helm and Emily Bernard told us about the value of their visits.
My first tour of Israel had a great impact on my life. It changed the way I read the Bible. It changed my prayer life. It changed the way I think about culture and Judaism and the Hebraic roots of my faith.
By the end of this year, Passages will have brought 10,000 students to the Holy Land as part of this program leaders call a game changer in relations between faiths and nations. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.